Chapter 1. The evening that said enough, Jason Simmons stood in a kitchen that wasn't his, humming to himself as if it were. The skillet hissed softly as butter melted into a thin shimmer. He tilted the pan with practiced ease, letting the garlic settle in without burning. The smell filled the apartment in seconds, warm, familiar, grounding. It was the kind of smell that made a place feel lived in, even if you hadn't signed the lease. "Smells like you're showing off again," she called from the living room. Jason leaned slightly, peeking past the doorway. "Showing off would imply I'm doing something difficult. This is survival-level cooking at best." "Oh, please," she said, her tone teasing but distracted. "Last time you said that you made something with what was it, thyme?" "That's still survival," he replied. "If people start clapping, then I'll worry." She laughed, but it came a half-second too late, like it was running to catch up. Jason noticed that. He noticed everything. Not in a suspicious way. Not in a paranoid way. Just he paid attention. Always had. The chicken was nearly done, edges crisping just enough to give it texture. He plated it neatly, adding vegetables he'd roasted earlier. Color mattered. It made things feel intentional. "Dinner's ready," he said. "In a sec." He nodded to himself, though she didn't see it. Then he set 2 plates on the small dining table and took a seat, waiting. A minute passed. Then another. Jason leaned back slightly, listening instead of watching. The faint tap of fingers against a phone screen repeated in quick bursts. A pause. Then a quiet exhale, almost a laugh. He stood, not irritated but purposeful, and walked into the living room. She sat curled up on the couch, knees tucked under her, phone angled toward her face. The glow lit her features more than the lamp beside her. "Hey," he said lightly. "Food's getting cold." She looked up quickly. "Oh, sorry. Just work thing." Jason smiled. "Work sounds hilarious." She blinked, then laughed. "It's stupid. Just memes from the office. You know how it is." "Ah yes," he said, nodding. "Extremely urgent meme traffic." "Exactly," she said, finally setting the phone down. "Okay, I'm all yours." The phrasing landed oddly, though neither of them said it out loud. They sat down together and for a while things felt normal. They talked about work, his steady and predictable, hers slightly chaotic but manageable. He made a joke about a spreadsheet error that somehow had an entire department convinced numbers could be emotionally incorrect. She laughed genuinely this time. "That doesn't even make sense," she said. "Neither did the meeting," Jason replied. He liked making her laugh. Not because he needed the validation, but because it felt like alignment. Like things were working the way they should. For about 10 minutes, everything was easy. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively. Jason kept talking. She nodded, though her eyes had shifted. The phone buzzed again. "Sorry," she said, already reaching for it. "Of course," Jason replied, his tone unchanged. He continued eating, slower now. Quick reply, he thought. That's normal. He believed that. He really did. But quick replies had become conversations. And conversations had become patterns. He finished half his plate before she spoke again. "Sorry, what were you saying?" she asked, looking up briefly. Jason paused, then shrugged faintly. Something about emotionally unstable numbers. It wasn't important. It sounded funny. It was at the time. She smiled apologetically. "You can say it again." He shook his head gently. It had a moment. It passed. She hesitated, then nodded, and her phone lit up again. Jason didn't watch her this time. He just ate. A few minutes later, he stood, collecting both plates. "I'll clean up," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." He carried the dishes into the kitchen, letting the sound of running water replace the quiet he didn't want to sit in. He moved efficiently. He always did. Rinse, scrub, stack, dry. Put away what he could. Behind him, faint laughter slipped in from the living room. Not loud, not constant, just enough to notice. It wasn't the sound itself. It was what it meant. Jason set a plate down and leaned his hands on the counter for a moment. His grandfather's voice drifted into his thoughts, as it often did. "Every day you wake up is a gift. Don't waste it on meaningless things." Jason straightened. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He checked himself, really checked, and found nothing sharp. No edge, no heat, just clarity. When he walked back into the living room, the scene hadn't changed. She was in the same position, same focus, same light from the phone. Time hadn't stopped. It had just moved without him. Jason crossed the room quietly and picked up his jacket from the chair. He slid it on with smooth familiarity, like he'd done it 1,000 times. The doorknob clicked softly as he turned it. "Wait, what?" she said quickly, looking up. "Where are you going?" Jason paused, one hand on the door. There was a moment, a small one, where he could have softened it, turned it into a joke, stayed. He didn't. He looked at her, really looked this time. "I'm going to spend my time where it's appreciated," he said calmly. "I'm not going to compete for your attention with another man." The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Her face shifted, confusion first, then something sharper. "Jason, it's not like that," she said quickly, standing up. It's just work stuff. You're overthinking. I'm not, he interrupted gently. That stopped her. I'm not accusing you of anything, he continued. I'm just paying attention. Then stay and talk about it. Jason shook his head, a small, almost apologetic motion. We already did, he said. Just not out loud. She stared at him, trying to find the argument that would hold him there. But this wasn't a fight. There was nothing to push against. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, she said, her voice softer now. I know, he replied. That seemed to land harder than if he'd said the opposite. He opened the door. Jason. He paused again, but only briefly. Good night, he said. Then he stepped out. The door closed with a quiet click. Inside the apartment, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud. She stood there, phone still in her hand, staring at the space where he had been. The message on her screen blinked, waiting. She didn't read it. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't distracted. She was alone with something she hadn't been paying attention to, and she didn't like what she saw. Chapter 2. The Absence Speaks. Jason didn't slam the door when he got to his apartment. He never did. Even alone, even when no one was there to hear it, he closed doors the same way he always had. Steady, controlled, deliberate. It was a habit his grandfather had drilled into him years ago. A man who can't control how he closes a door can't control much else. Jason had laughed at the time. He understood it now. The quiet click behind him felt louder than it should have. He dropped his keys into the small ceramic bowl near the entryway, slipping off his jacket and draping it across the back of a chair. Everything landed where it belonged. There was comfort in that, things staying where you left them. Nothing unexpected. Nothing shifting. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at nothing in particular, then exhaled slowly and moved on. Well, he muttered to himself, stepping into the kitchen. Guess I get leftovers. Technically not true. He hadn't brought anything back with him. Still, the line filled the space, and for Jason, sometimes that was enough. He opened the fridge, scanning its contents. A container of pasta, some vegetables, a half-used jar of sauce. Nothing impressive. Nothing disappointing. Survival level, he said under his breath, echoing his earlier joke. He grabbed the pasta and set it on the counter. The microwave hummed to life soon after, a predictable mechanical sound that didn't demand anything from him. It just did its job. Jason leaned against the counter, folding his arms loosely. This was the part people assumed would be difficult, the immediate aftermath, the pacing, the second-guessing, the urge to go back and fix something. He searched for those feelings. They didn't show up. That didn't mean he felt nothing. It just wasn't chaotic. If anything, it was quieter than usual, clearer. The microwave beeped. Jason nodded once, as if something had been confirmed, and pulled the container out. He grabbed a fork, took a bite, and shrugged. Decent, he said. He carried the food to the small table near the window and sat down, eating without distraction. No phone, no TV, just the city humming faintly beyond the glass. It was a routine he'd always liked, uninterrupted time. Space to think without being pulled in 10 directions. Tonight, there just happened to be one thought sitting still long enough to look at. He hadn't been wrong. That mattered less than people thought. Being right didn't feel good when it meant something had ended. But it did remove doubt. Jason took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. He ran through the evening again, not searching for mistakes, just reviewing it the way he would anything else, objectively. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't accused. He hadn't asked her to change. He'd made a decision. Simple, clean, necessary. He set his fork down briefly, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, he said quietly. That tracks. His phone buzzed on the table. Jason looked at it. One message. Her name. He didn't open it. Not immediately. Instead, he finished his bite, wiped his hands with a napkin, and leaned back slightly. The buzz hadn't startled him. He expected it. What mattered was what he did with it. He picked up the phone, turned it over once in his hand, then placed it back down face down. Not right now, he said. It wasn't avoidance. It was timing. Jason had a rule about that, even if he'd never said it out loud. Don't respond when you're still processing. Give yourself enough space to be honest instead of reactive. He stood, rinsed his container, and set it in the drying rack. The apartment felt the same as it always did. Orderly, calm, a little too quiet in a way he usually didn't mind. Tonight, he noticed it, which was new. Jason moved to the couch, dropping into it with a low breath. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped, staring at the blank television. You gonna turn that on? He said to himself. Or are we just sitting here for dramatic effect? He reached for the remote, then stopped halfway. Nah. He let his hand fall back. Silence again. But not uncomfortable. Just present. Across the city, in an apartment that suddenly felt unfamiliar, she sat on her own couch, still holding her phone. The message she had typed and erased 3 times hovered in her mind despite not being on the screen anymore. The 4th attempt stayed. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. She stared at it. Her thumb hesitated over the send button. Felt small. Too small. like putting a bandage on something she hadn't even taken the time to understand yet. The thought made her stomach tighten. She deleted it. "What are you doing?" she said out loud, her voice sharper than she expected. The room didn't answer. She stood abruptly, pacing once across the living room before doubling back. Her gaze caught the kitchen. Clean. Spotless. Jason had done that. Of course he had. He always did. The reality of it settled over her like something heavy and inescapable. He hadn't left in anger. He'd left after doing something kind. That made it worse. "Oh my God," she muttered, dragging a hand through her hair. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Same conversation. Another message from her coworker. Something stupid. Probably funny. She didn't open it. Instead, she stared at the name at the top of the screen, letting the pattern finally come into focus. It wasn't one message. It wasn't a joke. It was accumulation. Time, piece by piece, taken from somewhere else. She walked to the kitchen slowly, her gaze tracing over the counter he'd wiped down, the dishes neatly stacked to dry. "You didn't even say thank you," she whispered to herself. "Not tonight. Not yesterday. When was the last time?" The question didn't have an answer she liked. She leaned against the counter, gripping the edge with both hands as she let out a slow breath. "I wasn't cheating," she said. The words sounded hollow in the quiet. She straightened slightly, shaking her head. "No, I wasn't." But the defense didn't feel like a defense anymore. It felt like the wrong argument. Her mind replayed the moment at the door. "I'm going to spend my time where it's appreciated." There was no accusation in it. That was what made it land. It wasn't about what she had done with someone else. It was about what she hadn't done with him. She pressed her lips together, closing her eyes for a moment. "I thought you'd just be there," she said quietly. Saying it out loud made it worse. The assumption, the casual certainty. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Who do you think you are?" she said, the words biting this time. Her reflection caught in the microwave door, faint but visible. She looked at it, really looked, and she didn't like what she saw. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was catastrophic, because it was careless, and careless was harder to defend. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, stared at the screen for a moment longer, then opened the conversation. Another message, another joke, another piece of time waiting to be taken. She held her thumb over the keyboard. Then, slowly, deliberately, she hit a different button. Mute. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar. But it also felt right. "Okay," she said softly, as if committing to something. Not a fix. Not yet. But a recognition. Across town, Jason finally picked up his phone. He flipped it over, unlocking it with a practiced motion. Her message waited for him. Simple. Short. He read it once. Then again. The words didn't change. He set the phone down beside him. Not ignored. Not dismissed. Just considered. Jason leaned back into the couch, resting his head against the cushion. For the first time that night, something resembling uncertainty flickered at the edge of his thoughts. Not about what he'd done. About what came next. He stared at the ceiling, letting out a slow breath. "Guess we'll see," he said quietly. And for once, he didn't already have the answer. Chapter 3. Advice from those who lasted. Her grandparents' house still smelled the same. That was the first thing she noticed when she stepped inside. The faint mix of brewed coffee, old books, and something warm that never quite had a name. It wasn't overpowering. It was steady, familiar, like it had decided long ago it wasn't going anywhere. She lingered just inside the doorway for a second longer than necessary, her hand still resting on the doorknob. "Nobody ever just walks in anymore," her grandfather's voice called from the living room. "They hover first, like the house might change its mind." She let out a small breath and stepped fully inside. "I was taking a second. To do what? Think. That's dangerous," he said. She smiled faintly despite herself and walked in. He sat in his usual chair. Same posture, same quiet authority. A newspaper folded neatly in his lap. He looked up at her, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You look like you lost an argument," he said. "I didn't have one," she replied. "Those are usually the ones you lose." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. There wasn't a clever comeback sitting ready for her. That in itself felt new. "Where's Grandma?" she asked instead. "In the kitchen," he said, nodding behind her. "Where problems go to get turned into something edible." That's surprisingly accurate. "I'm full of wisdom," he said. "Some of it by accident." She shook her head lightly and made her way toward the kitchen. Her grandmother stood at the counter, slicing something with the kind of patience that came from doing it 1,000 times before. She didn't look up right away. "You gonna stand there all day?" she said. "Or are you coming in?" "I'm already in," she replied. "Not really." That stopped her. She stepped closer, leaning lightly against the counter. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her grandmother finally looked up. "Of course you do," she said calmly. "You wouldn't be here otherwise." There was no judgment in her tone. No surprise either. Just expectation. That was worse. Her grandfather wandered in a moment later, settling into a chair near the table without saying anything. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just listened. She took a breath, then let it out slowly. Jason left, she said. Her grandmother nodded once, as if that had already been clear. What did you do? She asked. The directness made her flinch slightly. Why do you assume I did something? Her grandmother tilted her head, considering. Because he didn't seem like the kind of man who leaves casually, she said. So if he left, something mattered. Her grandfather chuckled softly. Always start with the obvious, he added. She looked between them, a flicker of frustration rising. I didn't cheat. No one said you did, her grandmother replied evenly. It's just, she paused, struggling to frame it. There's this guy at work. We talk. He sends jokes, memes, whatever. It's not serious. It's nothing. And Jason didn't see it as nothing. He said he wasn't accusing me of anything, she said quickly. He just left. Her grandmother set the knife down, turning fully toward her. What exactly did he say? She hesitated, then repeated it. I'm going to spend my time where it's appreciated. I'm not going to compete for your attention with another man. The words felt heavier here than they had in her apartment. Her grandfather let out a low whistle. That's a clean sentence. Her grandmother didn't react outwardly, but something in her expression shifted, something more focused. And was he wrong? She asked. The question hit harder than expected. I mean, it's not like I was choosing the other guy, she said defensively. It was just conversation. It's normal for coworkers to. I didn't ask what it was, her grandmother interrupted gently. I asked if he was wrong. She opened her mouth again, closed it. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, she said instead, quieter now. That wasn't the question either. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Her grandmother waited. So did her grandfather. Neither of them rushed to fill it. No, she admitted finally. He wasn't wrong. Something in the room settled. Not resolved, but clarified. Her grandmother nodded once, as if something had clicked into place. Then we can work with that, she said. Work with what? The truth. Her grandfather shifted in his chair. That's usually where things start, he added. She folded her arms loosely, looking down at the counter. I didn't mean to hurt him, she said. Her grandmother's expression softened, but her voice didn't lose its edge. Intentions don't erase outcomes, she said. They just explain them. That's not fair. It doesn't have to be, her grandmother replied. It has to be real. She let out a frustrated breath, running her hands through her hair. So what? I was supposed to ignore everyone else? Never talk to anyone? That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? Her grandmother picked the knife back up, cutting one more deliberate slice before setting it aside again. I'm saying love isn't a feeling, she said. That sounds wrong, she replied instinctively. It sounds inconvenient, her grandmother corrected. Which is why people argue with it. Her grandfather chuckled quietly. She's had that one ready for years. Her grandmother ignored him. Feelings come and go, she continued. They change. They fluctuate. If love were just a feeling, no relationship would last past the first difficulty. She leaned lightly against the counter, meeting her gaze directly. Love is a choice, she said. A decision you make every day, sometimes every hour. The words didn't feel abstract. They felt specific, directed. When you spend your time on another man, her grandmother went on, that's time you're choosing not to spend on the man you say you love. I wasn't choosing him over Jason, she insisted weakly. Then why did Jason feel like you were? That stopped her again, because she didn't have a clean answer. Her grandmother let the silence sit for a moment, then continued. As long as you leave the door open, she said, people will walk through it. That's not new. That's not unique. That's human nature. Her grandfather nodded. Men especially, he added bluntly. She glanced at him. That's a little unfair. It's a little accurate, he replied. Her grandmother stepped in gently before it turned into a debate. You are the gatekeeper, she said. Not Jason. Not the other man. You. I didn't think I needed to set boundaries for something that wasn't serious. That's exactly when you do, her grandmother replied. The realization crept in slowly, unwelcome but undeniable. You're saying this is my fault, she said quietly. I'm saying you're responsible, her grandmother corrected. Those are not the same thing. How are they different? Fault is about blame, she said. Responsibility is about ownership. One keeps you stuck. The other lets you change something. She swallowed, the knot in her chest tightening. I wasn't disloyal, she said, grasping for something to hold on to. Her grandmother's gaze didn't waver. Do you really think sex is the only way to be disloyal? She asked. The question hung there, heavy and undeniable. Because when she looked at it honestly, not defensively, not dismissively, it didn't hold. No, she said quietly. Her grandmother nodded. Trust isn't protection from bad behavior, she said. It's the reason you avoid the behavior in the first place. The words landed deeper than anything else had. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. She looked down at her hands, turning them slightly as if the answer might be written there. I thought we were steady, she admitted. I thought he'd just be there. Her grandfather leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. And he was, he said, until you gave him a reason not to be. There was no accusation in it. Just truth. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping as the resistance finally gave way to something else. Understanding. Uncomfortable. Necessary. So what do I do? She asked, her voice quieter now. Her grandmother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached across the counter and took her hand, holding it firmly. You decide what you want, she said, and then you align your actions with that decision. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. She squeezed her hand slightly. Every day. Her grandfather leaned back again, nodding once. And when you mess it up, he added, you own it fast. Not 3 days later when it's safer. A small, humorless laugh escaped her. That sounds difficult. Her grandmother smiled faintly. That's because it is, she said. If it were easy, everyone would still be together. She let that settle, then released her hand. Now, she said, her tone shifting slightly. Do you want him back? Or do you want to feel better about losing him? The question was so direct it took the air out of the room. She didn't hesitate this time. I want him back, she said. Her grandmother studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good, she said. Then stop thinking about what to say. Then what do I do? Her grandmother smiled, not unkindly. You become someone who wouldn't lose him the same way twice. The simplicity of it made it harder, not easier. But for the first time since the door had closed behind Jason, she felt something shift. Not panic, not guilt. Direction. It wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. But at least now it was clear. Chapter 4, Boundaries and Mirrors. The next morning didn't feel dramatic. That bothered her more than anything. She had expected something heavier. Some obvious emotional weight pressing down on her chest. Something that would justify how unsettled she felt. Instead, the morning unfolded like every other one had. Light filtered through the blinds. The coffee maker clicked on with its familiar rhythm. The world continued without acknowledging what had changed. That was the problem. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual, studying her reflection like there might be something new written there overnight. There isn't, she said quietly. The same face looked back. The same person. That realization shifted something. Her grandmother's voice returned, steady and uncompromising. You become someone who wouldn't lose him the same way twice. That wasn't going to show up overnight. It wasn't a mood. It wasn't an apology. It was behavior. She exhaled slowly and reached for her phone on the counter. For the first time in months, she didn't open her messages first. Instead, she opened settings. The gesture felt small, almost meaningless, but it wasn't. She scrolled through her notifications, her thumb pausing over the conversation she didn't need to open to recognize. The name sat there comfortably, like it belonged. Didn't. Her thumb hovered a moment, uncertainty flickering. This isn't about him, she said to herself. And it wasn't. That clarity made the next step easier. Mute wasn't enough. Mute was comfortable. It softened the noise without removing the source. She tapped again. Block. The screen changed instantly, as if it had been waiting for her to decide. The silence that followed felt sharper this time. More intentional. Okay, she murmured. It wasn't victory. It was a start. Across town, Jason sat at his desk, scrolling through a spreadsheet that had finally stabilized after 2 days of quiet chaos. Tell me you wrestled those numbers into submission, Mark said, leaning against the edge of Jason's cubicle. Jason didn't look up right away. Negotiations were tense, he replied, but we reached a mutual understanding. Good, Mark said. I was worried we'd have to send in backup. Jason glanced up, one eyebrow lifting. You? He said. Backup. Emotional support counts. Jason smirked faintly. I'll keep that in mind. Mark studied him for a second longer than usual. What? Jason asked. You're. Mark gestured vaguely. Here. I usually am, Jason replied. Yeah, but today you're extra here. Jason leaned back slightly in his chair. That sounds like feedback without a point. Mark shrugged. Just saying. You're quieter. I'm working. You always work. Jason tilted his head. I also occasionally speak, he said. We've had conversations before. Not like this. Jason let the comment settle without immediately deflecting it. Mark wasn't wrong, but he wasn't fully right either. Jason wasn't withdrawn. He just wasn't filling space for the sake of it today. Had a long night, Jason said, offering a partial truth. Mark nodded as if that explained everything. Ah, he said. One of those. Jason didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Mark gave him a brief, understanding look, then clapped him lightly on the shoulder. Well, he said, If you need to borrow my emotional support skills, I charge by the hour. I'll draft a contract, Jason said. Make sure it includes snacks. I'm not negotiating under those conditions. Mark laughed and walked away. Jason watched him go for a moment, then turned back to his screen. Interactions like that came easily to him. Always had. He moved through conversations without friction, adapting to tone, timing, expectation. It was effortless in a way he rarely questioned. But there was something different now. Something that lingered just beneath that ease. He caught himself reaching for his phone, then stopping. Not because he didn't want to look, because he didn't need to, not yet. There was a discipline to that, one he hadn't always noticed before. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling quietly. Stay on track, he muttered. It wasn't about avoiding her. It was about not interrupting his own thoughts just because something external called for his attention. That realization lingered longer than expected. She didn't go to work right away. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her, a blank page staring back as if waiting for something worth writing. She tapped the pen against the edge of the paper, her thoughts scattered but circling the same point. Alignment. That word kept coming back. She had said she loved Jason. She believed it, but belief and behavior hadn't matched. That was the problem. Okay, she said, the word firmer this time. She wrote it at the top of the page. What do I actually want? The question felt obvious, but when she pushed past the surface answer, it shifted. Not just Jason. Not just the relationship. She wrote more slowly now. I want to be someone who respects what I have. She paused, reading it back. That felt closer. Less about him, more about her. Her pen hovered again before she added a second line. No pretending something is small when it isn't. Her grandmother would have approved, probably with that quiet nod that meant keep going. She leaned back slightly, studying the page. It wasn't complicated. That was the frustrating part. Nothing she was writing was new information. It just hadn't been applied. Her phone sat off to the side. Silent. Not ignored. Controlled. She picked it up, unlocking it slowly. This time, when she opened her messages, there was only one conversation she needed to look at. Jason's. She read her last message again. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. Felt incomplete now. Not wrong. Just insufficient. She started typing, then stopped. Deleted it. Her grandfather's voice echoed faintly this time. Own it fast. Not when it's safer. Her thumb hovered again. What are you actually saying? She asked herself. Not what sounded right. Not what felt less uncomfortable. The truth. She started typing again. Slower this time. Careful. Not rehearsed. When she finished, she read it twice. No defensiveness. No explanations hiding behind softer language. Just ownership. She hit send before she could edit it again. The message disappeared into that quiet digital space. No immediate response waiting on the other side. She set the phone down, resisting the urge to stare at it. This isn't about getting a response, she said. It was about saying the right thing for the right reason. Even if it took time. Even if it took more than words. Jason's phone buzzed once. He glanced at it instinctively. Her name again. This time he picked it up. Not rushed. Not delayed. He read the message carefully, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as he moved through each sentence. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. Something had changed. Not everything, but enough to notice. He exhaled slowly, folding his arms behind his head. Okay, he said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution, but it wasn't nothing either. For the first time since he had walked out that door, the silence between them felt different. Not empty, not final, just waiting. And for the first time, neither of them rushed to fill it. Chapter 5, The Quiet Work of Repair. Jason didn't answer right away. That was the first difference she noticed. Not silence itself, that part she expected. Jason wasn't reactive. He didn't rush to fill space with words that hadn't settled yet. But there had always been an unspoken rhythm between them. A kind of responsiveness that felt consistent enough to rely on without thinking about it. Now that rhythm was gone, or at least paused. She set her phone down on the table, face up this time, and forced herself to step away from it. This wasn't about watching. It was about doing. Her grandmother hadn't told her to fix it. She had told her to change. And change, she was beginning to realize, was less about moments and more about pattern. Jason leaned against the back wall of the elevator as it hummed toward the lobby, his phone still in his hand. He had read her message twice. Not because it was complicated. Because it was different. There was no softness covering anything. No attempt to make it easier to receive. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't overly apologetic. It just was. He respected that. Didn't mean he trusted it yet. But he respected it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped out into the building's lobby, nodding politely to the receptionist as he passed. Busy day? She asked. Jason shrugged slightly. Productively chaotic. She smiled. The best kind. So I've been told. He kept walking, stepping out into the early evening air. The city moved around him with its usual steady push. People heading somewhere, conversations overlapping, traffic humming without pause. Jason slipped his phone into his pocket. He wasn't ignoring her. He just knew himself well enough to recognize what would happen if he answered too soon. He'd make it easy. And easy wasn't always honest. The grocery store was quieter than usual. She moved through it slowly, more deliberate than she had been in a long time. Not distracted. Not rushing through a list she half remembered. Picking. Choosing. Paying attention. Her cart held only a handful of things. Ingredients she knew Jason liked. Meals he had made for her before. Details she had absorbed passively at the time but never treated as something worth remembering. Cherry tomatoes, she muttered softly, reaching for a container. Not the big ones. He said they're… What did he say? Pretending to be something they're not, she finished, a faint smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a grand memory, but it mattered, because she remembered it now. At checkout, she caught herself reaching for her phone, then stopped. The habit was automatic. That was the problem. Instead, she stood there quietly, watching the cashier scan each item, noticing the rhythm of it, the small, ordinary interaction she would have usually filled with distraction. Paper or plastic? The cashier asked. Paper, she said. Cooking tonight? She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Yeah. For someone. The question lingered just long enough to feel intentional. For myself, she said. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either, because whatever came next, whatever she hoped for, had to start there. Jason unlocked his apartment door and stepped inside, setting his keys in their usual place. Same routine. Same quiet. He loosened his tie as he walked toward the kitchen, glancing absently at the counter, then stopped. Something was off. Not dramatically, subtly. The absence of something he couldn't immediately name. He stepped forward, scanning the space again. Then it clicked. No leftovers. No meals waiting. No second plate rinsed and set to dry after someone else had eaten with him. Jason exhaled softly, a faint smile tugging at his expression. Well, he murmured. Guess we're upgrading from survival again. He opened the fridge, considered his options, then pulled out a few ingredients. Cooking wasn't difficult for him. It never had been. But tonight felt different. Not because of what he was making, because of what wasn't there. Or who. He moved through the motions, chopping, seasoning, stirring, with the same steady precision he always had. But this time, there was no conversation filling the space. No intermittent laughter drifting in from another room. Just the quiet sound of work being done. Jason leaned slightly against the counter as something simmered on the stove, his thoughts settling whether he asked them to or not. He didn't miss the distraction. That wasn't it. He missed the engagement, the presence, the feeling of shared time actually being shared. That distinction mattered, more than he'd realized. She stood in her kitchen, staring at the ingredients she had just laid out. It would have been easier to just order something. Faster, less pressure. But that wasn't the point. You're not fixing this with convenience, she said to herself. She picked up the knife, hesitating only briefly before starting. Her movements weren't as smooth as Jason's. Not practiced, not confident, but they were intentional. That mattered more. She chopped slower than necessary, focusing not just on the task but on staying present with it. No phone, no background noise pulling her away, just attention. She stopped halfway through, resting her hands lightly on the counter. This is what he meant, she said quietly. Not the cooking, the presence, the way he had been there even when she hadn't been. Her chest tightened slightly at the realization. How many times? She murmured, not looking for a number, because the number didn't matter. The pattern did. She straightened, picking the knife back up. Doesn't matter, she said. Not again. Jason plated his food simply, carrying it over to the table without much ceremony. He sat down, took a bite, and nodded to himself. Still got it, he said under his breath. The humor was automatic, comfortable, but it didn't carry the same weight tonight. He chewed slowly, glancing at the empty chair across from him. Not longing, just noticing. His phone buzzed. Jason paused, setting his fork down before reaching for it. He already knew who it was. He unlocked the screen and read the message. She hadn't sent another apology. That was the first thing he registered. Instead, it was something else. She told him what she had done, what she had changed. Not in vague terms, not in promises, in specifics, clear, unfiltered, and she didn't ask him for anything. That part stood out the most. Jason leaned back slightly, reading it again. She wasn't trying to convince him. She was showing him. That difference mattered. He set the phone down, folding his arms loosely as he stared at the table. Well, he said quietly, that's new. He wasn't ready to respond. But for the first time since he walked out of her apartment, he felt something shift that wasn't just distance. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something that pointed in that direction. She didn't check her phone. That was the hardest part. Every few minutes, the urge rose, sharp, insistent, familiar. Just check. Just see if he responded. No, she said firmly, stepping away from the counter as the thought surfaced again. This wasn't about managing anxiety. It was about proving something to herself. She cleaned as she went, mirroring the habit she had taken for granted before. Not perfectly, but deliberately. The kitchen slowly returned to order, the evidence of effort replaced by quiet completion. She dried her hands, glancing briefly at the phone still sitting where she had left it. It hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. She exhaled slowly, nodding to herself. Good, she said, not because there wasn't a response, because she didn't need one to continue. Jason stood at his window later that night, looking out over the city as it shifted into something quieter, slower. His phone sat on the table behind him. Unread silence, unanswered possibility. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking, not about what she had done, not anymore, about whether what she was doing now would last. Consistency, that was the measure. Not words, not one good day, pattern. Jason let out a slow breath, his reflection faint in the glass. Guess we'll find out, he said. And this time, the uncertainty didn't bother him, because for the first time, it felt like it might lead somewhere worth going. Chapter 6, Learning to Ask. Jason didn't expect the conversation to happen on a Tuesday. There was no symbolic weight to the day. Nothing about it suggested turning points or quiet shifts. It was another workday, predictable, steady, manageable. The kind of day he could navigate without thinking too hard about anything beyond what sat in front of him. Which is why, when his phone buzzed just after lunch and her name appeared again, he didn't reach for it immediately. Not out of hesitation. Out of habit. He finished the sentence he was typing first, reread it, hit send, and only then leaned back in his chair and picked up the phone. Her message was simple. Can we talk? Not to fix anything today. Just talk. Jason read it once. Then again. He noticed what wasn't there just as clearly as what was. No urgency. No emotional pressure. No attempt to frame the conversation as a solution. Just a request. He stared at the screen for a moment longer. The irony of it didn't escape him. A request. He exhaled slowly, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Jason didn't dislike helping people. He didn't resist being available. He resisted needing anything in return. Resisted the moment when a request turned into an obligation. Something owed, something expected, something that lingered. But this wasn't that. At least, it didn't feel like that. He typed a response, paused, adjusted it slightly, then sent it. Tonight works. She read his response twice before setting her phone down. It wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't distant. It was neutral. But neutral was better than silence. Better than uncertainty. Better than nothing. She nodded to herself once, a small movement that felt like confirmation. Okay, she said quietly. Now came the part she couldn't rehearse, and that terrified her more than anything else had so far. Jason got there 5 minutes early. Of course he did. The small coffee shop sat halfway between their apartments, a neutral space they had passed 100 times but rarely used. It wasn't tied to any particular memory, good or bad. That mattered. He stepped inside, scanning the room quickly before choosing a table in the corner. Not isolated, but quiet enough to talk without feeling surrounded. The barista greeted him with a casual smile. What can I get you? Black coffee, Jason replied. Simple. I try to be. She smiled faintly and turned to prepare it. Jason slipped his hands into his pockets, rocking back slightly on his heels as he waited. The calm he carried wasn't forced. It was habitual. But underneath it, something else had settled in. Not anxiety. Focus. He wasn't here to win anything. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here to listen. That wasn't new. What was new was what he might say afterward. She spotted him immediately when she walked in. Of course she did. Jason didn't demand attention in a room, but he carried a presence that made him easy to find once you knew him. Calm. Grounded. Like he belonged wherever he stood. He looked up as she approached, his expression steady but unreadable. Hey, she said, stopping just short of the table. Hey, he replied. The word held no tension, but it didn't carry familiarity the way it used to either. Can I? She gestured lightly to the chair across from him. Yeah, he said, nodding once. She sat down, smoothing her hands against her jeans briefly before letting them rest on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say, because they both chose not to rush it. Jason leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her. Not critically, not defensively. Just attentively. You look different, he said after a moment. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Different how? He considered it. Present, he said. The word landed quietly between them. Okay, she said, nodding faintly. That's fair. Another pause followed, but this one shifted slightly, less uncertain, more deliberate. I'm not here to convince you of anything, she said finally. I just wanted you to understand that I understand now. Jason didn't interrupt. That, in itself, felt different to her. I didn't think what I was doing mattered, she continued. Not because I didn't care about you, Because I didn't think about it at all. He nodded once. That makes sense, he said. She blinked slightly, caught off guard. It does. It's how patterns work, he replied. You don't notice them until something breaks them. She leaned back slightly, processing that. I don't expect you to trust me right away, she said. Or, at all honestly. That part's not really up to me. That's accurate, Jason said. Again, no resistance. Just agreement. And I'm not asking you to come back, she added. Not today. Maybe not ever. I'm just… She paused, searching for the right word. Fixing myself doesn't depend on what you decide, she finished. Jason watched her for a moment, something shifting slightly behind his eyes. That's also new, he said. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Yeah, I figured you'd notice. I did. Silence settled again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. Felt grounded. Jason leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. When I left, he said, it wasn't because I thought you were doing something malicious. I know. I left because I realized I was starting to accept less than I should. Her chest tightened slightly at the sentence, but she didn't look away. That's fair, she said. I don't negotiate for attention, he continued. Not because I think I deserve more than anyone else, because I think everyone deserves someone who chooses them without hesitation. She nodded slowly. I didn't do that. No, he agreed. Again, no edge, no blame, just clarity. She took a breath, then let it out slowly. I didn't know I was making you compete, she said. You weren't making me, Jason replied. I was allowing it. That's on me too. That stopped her. What? Jason shrugged slightly. I saw it happening. I just didn't address it. Because you didn't want to seem insecure, she said. He glanced at her, one eyebrow lifting slightly. That obvious? A little, she said. A faint smile touched his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Yeah, he admitted. I don't like asking for things. Never really have. Why? Jason leaned back again, exhaling slowly. Because asking means giving someone the option to say no, he said. Or worse, say yes and feel like they have to. She frowned slightly. That's not the same thing. It feels like it, he replied. The honesty in it shifted something between them. For the first time, it wasn't just her owning something. He was too. So instead, she said slowly, you just handle everything yourself, pretty much, and then leave when it doesn't work. That's not the plan, Jason said. It's just the result. She studied him for a moment, something soft but clear settling in her expression. You know that makes it hard for anyone to meet you halfway, right? She asked. Jason tilted his head slightly. Explain. When you don't ask for anything, she said, people don't know what you need, so they think you're fine. Until suddenly you're not. The words hung there, simple but precise. Jason didn't respond right away. Because for the first time, the point didn't bounce off his usual defenses. It landed. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the table briefly before meeting her gaze again. That's fair, he said finally. The admission felt quiet, but significant. Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. Not because the conversation had stalled, because something had shifted. Not back to where they were. Forward to somewhere they hadn't been before. She glanced at him carefully. So what happens now? She asked. Jason leaned back slightly, considering the question. Not avoiding it. Respecting it enough to take his time. We don't rush, he said. We don't pretend this didn't happen. And we don't skip steps just because it's uncomfortable. She nodded slowly. Okay. And I'm going to need to do something I don't usually do, he added. What's that? Jason held her gaze, steady and clear. I'm going to have to tell you what I need, he said. Her expression softened slightly, something like relief flickering beneath it. Good, she said, because I'm actually ready to hear it this time. A small, genuine smile broke through Jason's usual composure. Yeah, he said. I think you are. And for the first time since everything had shifted, the conversation didn't feel like a repair. Felt like a beginning. Chapter 7, Rebuilding Without Illusion. They didn't meet again the next day. Or the day after. That was intentional. Not avoidance. Not hesitation. Structure. Jason had been clear about that. No rushing, no patching things together just because silence felt uncomfortable. And for once, she didn't try to fill that space. She let it exist, even when it pressed against her patience. Consistency, she reminded herself. Not intensity. That was the difference now. Jason adjusted the sleeves of his shirt as he walked into the office Thursday morning, nodding to a few coworkers along the way. Back to full capacity? Mark called from across the room. Jason glanced over, lifting an eyebrow. Were we down? You were operating at about 70%, Mark said. Give or take. Jason sat down at his desk, powering on his computer. I didn't realize I came with a visible progress bar. Oh, it's subtle, Mark replied. Mostly noticeable if you're looking for it. And you were. I'm observant, Mark said. Jason smirked faintly. That's one word for it. Mark leaned casually against the divider. So, he said, lowering his voice slightly, whatever it was, better? Jason didn't dismiss the question this time. He considered it. Different, he said. Mark nodded as if that was a complete answer. Different's good, he said. It means something moved. Jason looked at him briefly, then back at his screen. Yeah, he said quietly. Something moved. She didn't wait for him to reach out. Not because she wanted to control the pace, because she understood something now. Waiting didn't equal doing. If this was going to work, if there was even a possibility of it working, it had to be built, not hoped for. She stood outside his apartment building, hands tucked loosely into the pockets of her jacket. Her eyes fixed on the entrance like it might give her a clearer answer the longer she stared. This isn't a surprise visit, she said under her breath. It wasn't. She had texted him earlier. I'd like to stop by tonight if that's okay. If not, I understand. He had responded. That's fine. Simple. Neutral. Consistent. She took a breath and stepped inside. Jason opened the door before she knocked. I saw you on the camera, he said. That's slightly unsettling, she replied. It's efficient, he said, stepping aside. Come in. She walked past him, her gaze taking in the apartment with fresh eyes. She had been there dozens of times before, but now she was actually seeing it. Everything had a place. Everything was maintained. There was no clutter waiting to be addressed later, because later never needed to exist. Jason handled things when they showed up. I never noticed how quiet it is here, she said. Jason closed the door, leaning lightly against it for a second before responding. That's usually the point, he said. She nodded, turning slightly to face him. I used to feel that, she said. The quiet. Sometimes, he replied. The phrasing was subtle, but intentional. She caught it. Not always, she acknowledged. No. They stood there for a moment, neither of them rushing to sit, to start, to soften the edges of what they both knew this was. A continuation, not a repeat. Finally, Jason gestured toward the couch. Sit, he said. She did, her posture more grounded than it had been in their last conversation. Jason took the chair across from her instead of sitting beside her. Distance. Not rejection. Structure. She noticed that too. I made some changes, she said. I know, he replied. She blinked slightly. You do. Jason nodded once. You told me. That's not the same as knowing. No, he agreed. But it's enough for right now. That landed differently than she expected. Not dismissal. Not complete acceptance. Just measured trust. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands together. I kept going, she said. Not just the one day. Jason's gaze didn't shift. Good. I blocked him, she added. Not muted. Blocked. Jason nodded once. Okay. And I've been paying attention to what I'm doing, not just what I'm saying. Also good. She exhaled quietly, a small tension leaving her shoulders. I'm not telling you this to convince you, she said. I'm telling you because it's happening whether you believe it or not. Jason's expression shifted slightly, something more engaged, more present. That's the right reason, he said. They held eye contact for a moment longer than either of them usually would have before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was deliberate. Jason leaned back slightly in his chair. I need to say something clearly, he said. Okay. If we try this again, he continued, it's not going to look like it did before. She nodded immediately. I don't want it to. That answer came too quickly. Jason noticed. So slow down, he said calmly. Don't agree just to agree. She exhaled, nodding again. This time more measured. Okay, she said. Jason watched her for a moment, making sure she meant it. Then he continued. I'm not interested in feeling secure because things are going well, he said. I'm interested in structure that holds when they're not. She sat with that, turning it over before responding. That means consistency, she said. And clarity, he added. No gray areas. Jason nodded once. Exactly. She shifted slightly on the couch, her posture straightening as something in her settled. I can do that, she said. Jason tilted his head slightly. You're going to have to show that, he replied. Not tell me. I know. Silence followed. Not a gap. A checkpoint. Jason leaned forward slightly now, resting his forearms on his knees. My turn, he said. She blinked. Your turn. To own something, he clarified. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush, just listened. I don't ask for things, Jason said. Not when I should. She nodded slightly, but said nothing. I wait until something crosses a line, he continued. And then instead of addressing it, I just decide. And leave, she said quietly. Jason exhaled faintly. Yeah. The admission didn't sound heavy, but it was. Why? She asked. He shrugged slightly. It's easier to walk away than to ask someone to change what they're already showing you. She studied him for a moment. That assumes they know what they're showing you, she said. Jason paused, because that was the part he had overlooked. Not out of ignorance, out of habit. That's fair, he said after a moment. There was no resistance in it, just acknowledgement. So if we do this again, she continued carefully, you don't just decide. You say something. Jason nodded. Earlier, he added. Not at the breaking point. Good, she said quietly. They both leaned back slightly, almost in sync, though neither of them commented on it. The tension in the room had shifted. Not disappeared, but realigned. This doesn't go back to what it was, she said. No, Jason agreed. It shouldn't. She exhaled slowly, a faint hint of a smile touching her expression. That's probably a good thing. It is, Jason said. The simplicity of the agreement landed between them without friction. No debate, no hesitation, just alignment. She stood slowly, not abruptly, but with intention. I'm not staying, she said. Jason nodded. Okay. I just wanted to show you where I'm at, she added. He stood as well, walking her to the door without rushing ahead or hanging back. At the threshold, she paused, turning slightly toward him. This is going to take time, she said. I know. I'm okay with that. Jason met her gaze, steady and calm. So am I, he said. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. Good night, she said. Good night. She stepped out into the hallway, the quiet of his apartment closing behind her once more. This time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something being built. Jason stood there for a moment after the door shut, his hand resting lightly against it. No rush to move. No need to. He turned slowly, walking back into the apartment, the same quiet settling around him. But it wasn't the same quiet. It had shape now, direction. He sat down, leaning back into the couch, letting out a slow breath. This might actually work, he said quietly. Not hope, not assumption, just possibility. And for once, that was enough. Chapter 8, Where Time is Chosen. The first thing that changed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture or a sudden declaration. It was timing. Jason noticed it about a week later when they sat across from each other at the same cafe, this time without the quiet uncertainty that had shaped their last conversation. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't subtle. The sound cut cleanly through the low hum of the room. She didn't reach for it. Not immediately. She finished her sentence first. And I realized that I used to treat time like it just kept showing up, she said, meeting his eyes. Like it wasn't something I was actively spending. Jason nodded once, listening. Now she reached for her phone. She glanced at the screen briefly, her expression unchanged, then flipped it face down and slid it slightly away. Sorry, she said. Not rushed, not distracted. Now I'm done. Jason's gaze shifted to the phone, then back to her. You didn't check it, he said. I did, she replied. I just didn't let it interrupt. The distinction landed. Not avoidance. Control. Jason leaned back slightly, a faint smile touching his expression. That's different, he said. I told you it would be, she replied. No pride, no defensiveness, just consistency. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They showed up in small ways that didn't ask to be noticed, but couldn't be ignored once they were. She showed up on time, stayed present, followed through, not occasionally, repeatedly, and perhaps more importantly, she stopped explaining it. She didn't narrate her effort. She let it exist. Jason paid attention. He always had. But this time, he wasn't looking for what was wrong. He was watching for what held. And what held stayed consistent. Jason, in turn, changed something that had been part of him for as long as he could remember. It didn't happen easily, or naturally, but it happened. They were walking through the park one afternoon, the early warmth of the season pulling people outside in quiet groups and scattered conversations. They moved in an easy rhythm, not close enough to touch constantly, not distant enough to feel separate. Present, balanced. Jason slowed slightly, his hands slipping into his pockets. I need something, he said. The words felt unfamiliar on his tongue. Heavy, important. She noticed immediately, not just what he said, how he said it. She didn't interrupt, didn't reassure him before he finished. Just listened. If something starts bothering me, he continued, his tone even but deliberate, I'm going to say it before it builds. She nodded once. Okay. And when I do, he added, I need you to actually hear it, not explain it away, not soften it. I will, she said. He glanced at her briefly. Not because it's me, he said. Because it matters. She stopped walking. Jason took another step before realizing, then turned back to face her. I know, she said. Her voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't apologetic either. It was aligned. I didn't hear you before, she continued. Not really. I was reacting to what I thought you meant instead of what you were actually saying. Jason watched her carefully. And now? He asked. She held his gaze. Now I understand that if you're saying something, it already matters, she replied. You're not someone who brings things up casually. That landed deeper than she intended. Because it was true. Jason didn't argue, didn't deflect. He just nodded once. Yeah, he said quietly. That's accurate. The moment passed gently, not lingering in a way that made it heavy. They started walking again. No tension, No pressure. Just forward. Rebuilding didn't look like what either of them expected. It wasn't emotional highs or dramatic reassurances. It was predictability, consistency, clear decisions made over and over again until they stopped feeling like decisions and started feeling like structure. They didn't avoid difficult conversations, but they didn't wait for them either. They spoke earlier, simpler, cleaner, and most importantly, they listened differently, not to respond, to understand. One evening, weeks later, Jason stood in his kitchen again. The same familiar setup, the same quiet, except this time it wasn't empty. She leaned against the counter, watching him work, not with passive distraction, but with interest. "You make that look way easier than it is," she said. Jason glanced over his shoulder. "It's not hard. That's because you've done it 1,000 times. Closer to 2,000, he replied. She smiled faintly. "Show off." He smirked slightly but didn't respond, turning back to the pan. After a moment, he spoke again. "Grab the plates," he said. She paused. "Are you asking?" she said carefully. "Or telling?" Jason glanced at her again, a faint challenge in his expression. "I'm asking," he said. She nodded once, moving immediately without hesitation. "Then yeah," she replied. It was a small exchange, almost nothing, but both of them felt the difference. Not command, not obligation, choice. They sat down together, no distractions, no divided attention. Just dinner, just presence. The conversation moved easily, not forced, not overly careful. Natural, earned. At one point, she set her fork down, studying him with a quiet seriousness that hadn't been there before. "What?" Jason asked. She shook her head slightly. "I used to think being comfortable meant everything was fine," she said. Jason leaned back slightly, listening. "Now?" he asked. "Now I think it means you stop paying attention," she replied. He considered that. "Sometimes," he said. She nodded. "I don't want that again," she added. Jason met her gaze evenly. "Then don't let it happen," he said. "No," she said, shaking her head once. "We don't let it happen." The correction was small, but intentional. Jason's expression softened, just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "That's better." Later that night, as they stood near the door, the same place things had once ended, they didn't rush the moment. There was no tension, no uncertainty, just awareness. Jason reached for his jacket, slipping it on in the same smooth motion he always had. She watched him for a moment, then said quietly, "Stay." The word wasn't hesitant, but it wasn't assumed either. It was offered. Jason paused, not because he didn't want to, because this was the part he used to avoid. Asking, choosing, saying something instead of letting the moment decide for him. He looked at her, taking in the way she stood there, present, steady, not waiting out of expectation but out of willingness. "Yeah," he said finally. "I will." The answer wasn't automatic. That was what made it real. Time didn't just pass after that. It was spent, chosen, protected, not perfectly, but intentionally. And in that difference, something stronger than what they had before began to take shape. Not fragile, not assumed, built, day by day, choice by choice, exactly the way it was meant to be.